Now, we're going to turn our attention to golf because a civil war of sorts has broken out in golf over the past 6 months. On the one side, you have the traditional homes of professional golf, the PGA Tour and the European Tour. And on the other side is a newcomer, LIV Golf, a company that is backed by enormous funding from a Saudi Arabian investment fund. It is going to host its first tournament in London next month, where the winner will take home $4 million. It is the biggest ever prize in professional golf. The player who finishes last in the 48-player event will take home a guaranteed $120,000. The tour will then move on to events in America and in Saudi Arabia. The top-ranked players in the world, Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth, Scotty Scheffler, they've all so far turned down the opportunity to play on the LIV Golf Tour. And it doesn't look like they'll be playing anytime soon because the PGA and European Tours have said they're not going to give permission for any of their players to play, which could mean some serious legal wranglings. However, the likes of Lee Westwood, Ian Poulter, Martin Keimer, Sergio Garcia, the stars of the European Cup Ryder Cup team, they all want to play in the LIV Golf event and may well be there in London next month. It's all fronted up by Greg Norman, two-time Open champion. He is the CEO of LIV Golf, and he sparked a massive backlash over the last 24 hours and put a real focus on the Saudi investment behind LIV Golf. He was asked about the murder, the horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and about human rights. He says the whole thing about Saudi Arabia and Khashoggi and human rights, talk about it, but also talk about the good that the country is doing in changing its culture. Look, we've all made mistakes, and you just want to learn by those mistakes and how you can correct them going forward. He was also asked about Saudi Arabia's attitude towards LGBTQ rights and said that, well, I don't have any gay friends as far as I know, and sort of left it as that. It sparked a huge amount of debate about, well, whether golfers should be going and playing at LIV Golf and what their intentions are for golf. To talk about that, I'm joined by Mark Cannizzaro from the New York Post, who is on the line. Evening, Mark.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well. You might give us some background to start on Greg Norman, such a familiar face around golf for decades, an Open champion, a former world number one. How he came to be the face of LIV Golf and of Saudi Arabian investment in golf, and as somebody who, from the outside, appears to be looking to take down the PGA Tour.
Well, I would tell you this, Nathan. I've been kind of involved in this. I was one of a handful of writers that Norman and those people and the people behind it had invited to a bit of a summit here in New York City back in the fall, and they mapped out all of their plans. And Norman, to his defense, and again, you know, we can be a little cynical about this, but, you know, from the start, their goal was not to overtake the PGA Tour or the European Tour. They want to coexist. Now, of course, any new tour that's being built and being started is going to infringe on both of those tours, obviously. And now we've seen now the pushback that you referred to in the lead in there. The problem, right, I mean, there's so many elements to this Norman situation. Obviously, they brought Norman in. He's a massive face of golf, as you just referred to. He's also a guy that has a history of trying to buck the trend in the PGA Tour and trying to start up a world tour, which never came to fruition. And the problem is that Norman keeps opening his mouth, right? I mean, you just regurgitated some of the things he said. And, I mean, honestly, what could he possibly have been thinking yesterday at that media day with some of the things that he said about, you know, the Khashoggi murder? You know, I mean, that wasn't a mistake, okay? That's not like you or me making a mistake by leaving our car parked in a no parking zone or something like that, right? I mean, I thought that was so insensitive and completely clueless for him to use that way of talking. And obviously the LGBTQ, I mean, you know, I don't have any gay friends as far as I know. I mean, what is he, in the Stone Age? I mean, the whole thing was just bizarre to me. So I think I'm really curious as to the powers that be behind the LIV Golf. At some point, I think they're going to want to put a muzzle on Norman, you know, or because it really is, you know, he's embarrassing them. I really think on the surface, it's an interesting idea, this team concept. You know, I mean, golf has a younger audience, and, you know, that audience isn't watching a lot of these tour events. You throw some of these big name players into a team event, and you're gonna draw a lot of younger eyeballs, and I think that was the whole point. And, you know, I'll be shocked if somewhere down the line the European Tour and the U.S. PGA Tour doesn't go ahead and put that concept together on its own, you know, so they can control it. But right now, there's a lot of hard feelings, a lot of bad feelings. I was very surprised when the news came out the other day that both tours were denying these waivers for these guys to play, because this was really kind of a one-off thing. I think they wanted to dip their toes in the water and have a chance to make some, massive money, which obviously these purses are beyond, anyone's imagination.
There's a couple of different things at play here, one of which is obviously where the best professional golfers in the world play their golf. The other is where the money is coming from behind LIV Golf. And when you were at that summit back in the autumn last year and you were talking to Greg Norman and golf writers were talking to Greg Norman, were questions been asked then about Saudi investment and the moral side of whether Saudi should be allowed to invest in golf to this extent, where we're looking at what essentially amounts to a takeover of professional golf if they could implement it, with the prize funds that are on offer and with the investment that they're committing to make, up to $2 billion added on yesterday alone? How front and centre for Greg Norman was the moral issue, or is it an issue at all where the money is coming from?
Well, I mean, again, they talk in circles around these things, Nathan, right? So, we did ask those questions, and it made clear that the money is not dirty money. It's not, dictator money. But where is that money coming from? Let's be honest here. I mean,
well, it's coming from Saudi Arabia, who run the investment fund.
Yeah, it's the investment fund. So I have to be honest, I'm not enough in tune to exactly the machinations that go on and where that money, specifically is coming from. We all make generalizations because what's taking place over there. So, the only thing I would say, and this is in zero defense of what goes on in Saudi Arabia, and I made a point in a column I wrote for today's New York Post, which was kind of suggesting that the PGA Tour is just trying to bully, anybody else that wants to infringe upon their world, and they're, a supposed nonprofit organization. I make the point that, the PGA Tour, the European Tour, which is now the DP World Tour, the Ladies European Tour, which, by the way, is completely in bed with the Saudis with the Aramco series, right? Is anybody squawking about that money? All of these tours are also involved in China. Now, where is that money coming from? A, and B, is that any, are the human rights issues in China any less egregious than what takes place in Saudi?
Clearly, again, they're not, Mark. But is that not absolute? Is that not absolute whataboutery? Because we're not talking about China trying to set up a brand new tour that would bring the best players in the world to a Chinese-backed enterprise. It's a Saudi Arabian, which is why everybody's talking about Saudi Arabia. And clearly, the PGA Tour and the European Tour has been to Saudi Arabia themselves to play events. Clearly, they haven't been perfect here. But were the PGA Tour and the European Tour not dead right to try and separate themselves from this, considering where the money is coming from? And while it may not be abundantly clear written down in paper, I think everybody understands it's Saudi Arabian money, that morally the PGA Tour needs to stay clear of this, the European Tour needs to stay clear of this, and above all, the best players in the world should not be associated with this, when we all know what has gone on in Saudi Arabia. This is clearly another element of sports washing that has infected boxing, Formula One, the Premier League with Newcastle United. This is just another part of this.
I have to say, I'm not as in depth in knowledge of the sports washing. I mean, obviously, I see what's taking place. We can all see it from 30,000 feet. View, so to speak. I would be a little bit cynical, though, in saying that the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, their concerns are less about where the money's coming from and more about their players being taken away from their tours. They don't want their stars taken away, whether it's to Saudi, whether it's wherever it's going, right? So that would be my cynical view in terms of the tour's moral grounds. And I think in my opinion, I feel like they care less about where that money's coming from and more about making sure that they keep Rory McIlroy on their soil and not playing 14 events in Saudi and taking him away from the big events in Europe and the United States, using Rory as one example. So,
but isn't that totally understandable as well?
That's my cynical view of that.
Isn't that understandable? While the PGA Tour is a non-profit organisation, and the European Tour, maybe it's a far more grave scenario they're facing here, considering the trouble they're already in. But is it not totally understandable from a basic business point of view that the PGA Tour would want the best players particularly considering it's not a fair fight they're going into. We have an event that has the biggest prize fund in golf taking place in London, that has no TV rights partner, that has no sponsors, that Saudi Arabia can spend as much money as they need to make this a success. So why would the PGA Tour just roll over? They need to do whatever they can, and if barring their players from going and forcing them to make a decision between the PGA Tour or Saudi money, surely they have to go and do that.
Oh, listen, I am not. I totally understand what the PGA Tour is doing. I mean, they have to protect their brand, and frankly, when you look at it, all of the top players, the top current, most relevant players, for lack of a better way to put it, they've all come out in support of the PGA Tour. So, I mean, really, Jay Monahan, the tour commissioner, I thought was speaking in a very cocksure, cocky, almost bully way in March when we were at the Players' Championship, because he was so emboldened by the Brooks Koepkas and the Bryson DeChambeaus and DJs and everybody, Rory, right down the line, Colin Morikawa. All of these guys have professed their allegiance to the PGA Tour. My only point here, and I feel like these players should be allowed to play wherever they'd like to play because they're independent contractors. And as long as they're fulfilling their duties in playing the X amount of events they're supposed to play to keep their tour card in United States or in your case, in Europe on the DP Tour. So, but, when we get into the sports watching and we get into where the money's coming from, that's kind of almost a separate issue to some degree. But I understand the PGA Tour trying to protect this turf. I do get it. And frankly, what you just mentioned, I mean, who's going to be playing that London event that anybody knows that really, I mean, I'm fascinated to see, first of all, what names are going to show up there. And I'm also fascinated to see, the guy, listen, there's got to be a lot of guys that are spooked and scared off by the tour saying it's going to, they'll sanction them if they go and play that event. I think, that's going to be a deterrent for a number of guys that would have played in it who didn't get the waivers. But there are going to be a couple of guys that, maybe Westwood, maybe Sergio, that may just go rogue, and just go and try to get the cash grab while it's there.
The money and the endless pot that Greg Norman seems to be working with is what makes this almost impossible to predict as well, because there is somebody is going to get that $4 million first prize, and there's a possibility it'll be a player outside the top 100 in the world, and it'll be very difficult for those players 20 to 50 in the world rankings who have a lot of money but maybe aren't totally set in a millionaire lifestyle for life, are looking at that thinking, I could turn up there and win. And while I think a lot of people felt when Phil Mickelson made his comments and describing them as scary mother, that this was going to die a death, and Brooks Koepka and Bryson DeChambeau, this was a very smart ploy to entice players to come for the money. And because of that, we really don't know where we're going to be by the end of this 8-tournament series, where the prize fund just keeps increasing. It's very difficult for those guys outside the top 20 to turn this down.
Yeah, and I think, the elephant in the room to some degree here, Nathan, is and you mentioned it a minute ago, where's anybody going to watch it? The last I hear is now they're going to be on YouTube. I mean, are people really going to go to YouTube and watch that golf tournament? I mean, I'll look at it because I'm in the business and I'm fascinated to see who's going to play. But the TV rights issue is a major stumbling block for these guys. The PGA Tour is already in bed here in the U.S. with CBS and ESPN and NBC. So there's not a lot of, I think Fox is really the only option, for them. So that's going to be a big issue as well. I think that's, most people are not going to the golf tournament. They're going to want to watch it on television. Where are they going to find it?
In terms of the top players and their decision, like Rory McIlroy is one of the very few who has come out and used the moral side as a reason for not signing up. Most players, it seems, have just committed to the PGA Tour because they say they're happy with what the PGA Tour are offering, the massive increase in prize money this year, and probably want to wait and see and don't want to take a risk. Do you think that Saudi Arabia's involvement and the executions that have taken place and the attitude and towards gay rights, do you think that plays a factor in golfers' decision making here, or is money the overriding factor for the vast majority of players?
Well, first of all, I think it should be a part of the decision-making process. And second of all, it's going to be a personal decision on these guys' part. And, we've heard Lee Westwood last week, turning kind of the other cheek and saying, listen, I'm not a politician. I'm just, I'm in it for the money. He literally came out and said, listen, God bless him for being honest. He said, I play golf for the money. And the most money is at that tour right now. So, but there's no question that, like Rory, there are a lot of other players who maybe are not as big names or as vocal as Rory has been, who are clearly looking at that and saying there's no way they would want anything to do with that because of those moral issues. But there's going to be other players that are going to go for the money grab, and those are choices these guys have to make. And another choice that these guys are going to have to make right now, more immediately, is do they want to deal with the courts and the law and this is all along. This has basically been headed for the courtroom, hasn't it? I mean, it's been pretty clear that that's where this is going. And frankly, is that good for golf? I would say no, it's not. But these players are going to have to decide also whether it's worth do they want to deal with that, right? Do they want to deal with going to court, getting into a lawsuit issue with the tour, all that kind of stuff. And I think the PGA Tour is banking on the fact that they're not going to want to deal with that and they're going to stay away from Saudi. But there will be some guys that don't because the money is too big.
And something else they're going to have to deal with is Greg Norman being the face of the tour. And his comments yesterday, which, as we said, were absolutely outrageous. It's difficult to know how that plays with those behind LIV Golf because on the one hand, what else can he say? You can't defend the indefensible, which is what he's been asked to do. But it's hugely damaging, I would imagine, in terms of recruiting those players because, Lee Westwood was uncomfortable in that interview last week. He's now going to face all those questions again that Greg Norman had to go through. That Norman has done huge damage to the game of golf with this, but does it matter? Like, are they happy actually in a way for Norman to be the one who takes all of this and is the face of Saudi Arabian investment rather than actually having to have a few people answering questions?
Well, that's a very good point you bring up because right now Norman's taking all the bullets because he's the face of the place. But once, let's just use some players as an example. If Lee goes ahead and does that, if Sergio does go ahead and do that, for example, those are two pretty big names in the world of golf. Certainly, across the pond from us here, and they're big names here. As soon as they sign up for that, that first tournament in London, if they're there, those guys are going to be peppered with questions about those things. And do they want to have to deal with that? The other issue, too, which is, again, this is like kind of an ancillary issue to a large degree, but, Sergio, who's been one of the greatest Ryder Cup players of our generation, in theory, at some point is going to be, in line to be a Ryder Cup captain, as Lee Westwood would and should be. He actually was in the mix for the most recent run at it. And same thing in the U.S. side with Phil Mickelson. I mean, Phil Mickelson was almost earmarked for 2024 at Bethpage here in New York. And, if those guys, if they jump ship, so to speak, and they, side with the Saudi, the LIV Tour, I mean, it's possible those guys could be exiled from the whole Ryder Cup equation, which is a big deal. Certainly it's a big deal for Sergio. And Phil's been one of the, biggest figures here on the U.S. side. So that's, there's so many balls in the air here with this thing, the moral issues, do you want to face sanctions? Do you want to deal with court? Do you want to deal with having to be peppered with the questions every week about where the money's coming from? And also this Ryder Cup thing. Hey, listen, it's possible the Masters might not invite these guys back. Sergio and Phil are past champions at Augusta. Is it possible if they go to Saudi and go and pledge their allegiance to that tour that these guys are no longer welcome at Augusta National for the Masters? I mean, that's Phil's favorite place on the planet, golf course on the planet and tournament. So there is just, there's a lot of things at stake here and a lot of, answers, that we're still, are questions that still need to be answered, from all these guys. It's just not as simple as going and making a gigantic paycheck.
Just to finish up and to go right back to the start and Greg Norman and Like, his place in golf history has always been a strange one, in that he's probably best remembered for what he didn't achieve and for blowing the Masters and, 9 times leading into the final round and not being able to get the job done, but, spent a huge amount of time as the world number one, a 2-time major winner. How's he found himself in a position where he appears to be so bitter? Like, his language, even away from Saudi Arabia, about how he wants to approach the tours now, that he wants to take them down. Whatever support is needed for the players legally, they will do whatever it takes to get these players playing in their event. How has he got to a stage where he seems so bitter towards the golfing establishment?
It was one of two things. Either the LIV people are paying him money that we can't even imagine, which I've got to think he's making a pretty good chunk. I have a hard time believing that he's still bitter over not being able to launch that world tour, being thwarted really essentially by Tim Fincham, the previous PGA Tour commissioner. I just have a hard time believing you carry that grudge that long. But I think he's just kind of sided with this because he's making more money than he can ever imagine. I mean, Greg Norman, frankly, is probably, who knows how much money he's lost over the years, in business dealings. But, the guy he was really a pioneer in terms of golfers, other than, really coming after Arnold Palmer, really, in terms of making, the crazy money off the golf course. And I don't know, maybe he found himself needing money. I don't really know. I don't know what the motivations are, to be honest with you. You're going to be questioned about this Saudi stuff and about where the money's coming from and the moral issues. He doesn't seem to have a problem with that. And I don't know where the bitterness is coming from. I really don't.
Mark, thanks a lot for joining us.
Enjoyed talking to you.
Mark Cannizzaro there from the New York Post. An interesting few weeks ahead in golf.